Hi guys, welcome to another Kamikaze creation video. Been doing a little bit of work since the last video. I've actually finished off that relay system in the glove box that I was working on. I've still got a little bit of work to do on the sensor wires that come from the ECU and go to all the sensors on the engine. So I've got to do a little bit more tidy up on that, and I'll probably do that in the next video. But I've also been working on the fuel system today, installing that fuel pressure system into the boot, and have redone the boot and made it a little bit better to work with, and I've run the fuel lines up to the front of the car. Also, for those of you that have been watching my video series, I started out on doing a little bit with this car, but I've also been working on the Celica, and the little Celica's headed off now to panel and paint, which is brilliant. That's going to be a huge leap forward on that car, and while that's away, I'll be continuing to work on this old girl, and I'll make sure I get heaps of photos. The process of panel and paint on that car and the change of colour should be exciting. But anyway, I'll show you what I've done with this fuel system today, and we'll get into it. From the last video, I've pretty much finished off the wiring for those relays that are running the fuel pump, thermo fans, the ECU, and there's an ignition relay in there. And the ECU fires up, and I can hook a laptop in it and get inside and have a look at the software. I've rerouted this grey line down here. Is my O2 sensor, wideband O2 sensor, so I've rerouted that. That was going in the driver's side, and I've got to wire it up to the gauge and to the ECU, and I've got a couple of other, these are auxiliary lines that I've got to set one more up to my tacho, so the ECU will trigger the tacho. This is my current setup in the boot, which I'm going to change over this afternoon. You can see down in the side there, I've got a little holly red fuel pump that pumps out at about 7 psi, and that was all good for the carby setup. But this is the new fuel system that Shane's built me. Very nice unit. A car to pump off to the side to draw fuel out of the fuel cell, and then a Bosch style 044 pump that's going to push it up to the front of the car. And I've also got a fuel pressure regulator that'll be going up the front, and I'll need to set the fuel pressure to maintain the correct pressure within the fuel rail. So that's the mission this afternoon: pull out this old system, even though it's reasonably new, and install the new pump, get it wired up, and run the lines up to the front of the car. I'm just making up some plates that I'm going to weld a stud to in the centre, so that I can screw these to the underside of the lining board for my boot, and the stud will come up through, and then I can just mount the fuel tank onto these studs. Originally I had it running down through the boot, and I had to lift the whole lining board out to with the tank attached, and it's just a nightmare. So hopefully I can set it up so I can put my lining board in and carpet in, and just fit the items down from the top, make it much more manageable and maintainable. So they're not super pretty, but I've fastened the bolt to the back of the lining board, so all four, and now I can sit that lining board in independently and bolt the tank in from the top. I've made up those fasteners to attach to the back, and now I can slide the tank. There's another one over here, but now I can undo the nuts and lift the tank out independent to the board, where before I had it coming up through the boot, and the two on the other side only went through the board, so I had to lift the whole board out to get that tank out. I've now run my new AN fuel line right along the length of the car, just tying it in to the existing fuel lines, and I'm using my original fuel line as the return line. So that's the rubber one coming back here is the return line back to the tank. So there's my two fuel lines, supply and return. The braided one is going to be the supply and the plastic one coming back will be the return. Couple of grommets going up into the tank. One of the grommets there on the plastic line, the return line, was originally the Speedo sensor wire. Went up through there and I just used a wad punch and opened it out. The second one I bought from Super Cheap, fitted it up, drilled the right size hole, and the lines go up into there beautifully. Here are the fuel lines coming up into the boot, and I've now glued this carpet down to the board. You can see the ply board in under there, it's about 12mm. You can see my bolts coming up through that will retain the fuel cell, which I'm going to put back in now and position the supply system. Here's the end result of today's work. Again, a lot of it has been fixing up shortcuts I took when I originally set the boot out. I had the fuel cell attached to the timber board that is my support board, and now I've made up those brace nuts that I've secured on the back, and I can remove and replace that fuel cell when I want. So that took a little bit to do and organise. I've glued the carpet down to the brace board so it's nice and secure, and I've now fitted up the fuel system that Shane supplied. Over the back corner there you can see the two fuel lines coming up from underneath the car, my return and supply line. The return line I've brought back into the fuel cell, so that's returning in just here, and this here is a breather line, and that breather line I'm just going to wait for a fitting, and the breather line I'm going to run back up into the top of my fuel tank. This line over here is a breather line running out the bottom of the floor, and I've got a rollover valve sitting out the bottom of the boot floor. So I'm going to run the breather line in from the fuel system back up into my tank. So that's not too bad for a day's work, pretty happy with that. I haven't wired up the pump yet. I'll do that early tomorrow, and I'll take you around the front of the car and show you what I've done. So I've got both my fuel lines from under the car coming to this point. There's an old steel line which was my supply line, which I've used now as a return line for this fuel system. I think I've got to run about 35 psi, I think it is. I haven't had exact look at the numbers in the fuel system, and I've got a pressure regulator. So I've got my supply line and my return line, and I've just got them running up over here at the moment. They're not terminated. So this is my fuel pressure regulator that I've got to set up somewhere after the fuel rail, so the fuel rail maintains the correct pressure. I've actually got a vacuum line to hook up that runs into the vacuum line that runs to the ECU, so I've got to fit that up somewhere and run that vacuum line. I'll probably again look at doing that tomorrow. A lot of this now is hinging on those extractors coming, and once I get the extractors on, I can finalise mounting the supercharger and the extractors and get them wrapped. I need to get the fuel rail back in so I can hook up those fuel lines to it, set the pressure in the fuel pressure regulator, and then I'm getting close. The ECU being in and running and having power, I've got a lot of the cables running out the side of the car, which are the main sensor cables for the engine. So once I get those extractors and get that supercharger mounted finally, hook up the fuel rail and plug those sensors in, I'm nearly good to go. The only other thing that I've got to do then is look at the exhaust. but she's moving well, moving forward. Having to wait for those extractors hasn't been too much of a stress because I've had so much work to do. But the engine bay is looking good, looking full. Liking those fuel lines running up there, and I really haven't got anything left. From what Shane supplied, there is next to nothing left. Got a lot of fittings, but haven't got a lot of fuel line. Looking good. I think that's it for the day. So guys, it's been another big day in the workshop. Got lots achieved, and it takes time. You know, building cars takes heaps of time. I have been, I started pretty early this morning on doing that boot setup, and things take time. So these 10-minute videos probably take about 12 hours in the shed, and then another 4 hours in the editing phase to bring this video to you. So thanks for watching. It means heaps to me that you're watching, and I've had some great feedback, really humbling feedback of people saying what I'm doing is motivating them to get in and do their cars, and that's the whole philosophy behind why I started doing this. You know, I've said in the early videos, if you're watching, I said I don't know everything. I definitely don't, but I'm a willing learner, and I listen to what people tell me. Shane's been an absolutely brilliant source of information, and putting this car together has taught me so much, especially about forced induction, running aftermarket ECUs, and doing wiring looms. It's an area that I've been very uncomfortable with in the past, and very happy to learn about. So keep watching, guys. Thanks for your participation. Take care, and see you in the next video.